All right, hello everybody. So today I'm going to be talking about management of sweet pepper health in a simplified hydroponic environment. So first, to give a little bit of background, although many of you may be familiar to some degree with hydroponics, this is a really ancient agricultural technique that's currently been gaining more and more traction in recent years. Um, it's the science of growing plants without the use of soil. And instead of using soil, they're growing in some sort of inert medium, and nutrient solution is used to deliver the nutrients plants need to the roots directly. This results in big crop yields, and it's interesting because it especially is useful in non-arable regions where they don't have good soil. Also, it's very efficient in water usage, which is a little bit counterintuitive because it's water-based, but actually it's a closed system, so you're not losing any water except for what is lost through transpiration. So really, you're maximizing the water that you do have, versus in traditional agriculture, a lot of times a lot of the water is wasted. And so the grower that I'm going to be helping today in this presentation is a smallholder farmer in Pillon, Haiti, in the Central Plateau region. Only got about a quarter acre of land and has limited resources, financially limited, doesn't have a lot of access to arable soil, electricity is very limited, some solar panel, but doesn't always work. There's access to water at a well, but this is challenging to get a lot of. And in addition, things like fungicides and pesticides are going to be challenging, very expensive, um, and not very available. And I have here that threats abound, and that's because this is a subtropical environment. There's a lot of fungi, a lot of pests. There's no winter, so things are not having to force to go through this overwintering step in their lifestyle, in their life cycle, excuse me. And also, high temperatures present their own challenges. In addition, because of those low resources, there's less ability to regulate and prevent outbreaks in nearby areas as well. So the site selection was very important given all of these challenges. Finding somewhere that was up a little bit elevated and is a little bit windy is important because you want to be able to have good circulation among the plants. Because if not, you get a higher humidity between the plants, especially as you pack them more closely. And this can lead to problems, a higher incidence of disease. That higher humidity can be optimal for a lot of pathogens. So that disease is really helpful. So that wind is very helpful. And the only issue that can bring is, like, if it's windy, you can bring in spores and things like that, but that's hard to avoid. And also, you needed a sunny environment. We want at least 8 hours a day, but more ideally. And this is probably one of the least challenging aspects of the site selection, because here in this area of the world, there's a lot of deforestation, and which contributes to the lack of arable soil. And there is a high level of, well, it's subtropical, so there's a lot of sun, a lot of light. So really, it's not a super challenging part of it, but it is important. And then orienting the greenhouse so that you get the right amount of light, so you're not blocking it with trees. You can see there's a banana grove over behind, perhaps there, and some fava beans behind there. So there's close to some other agricultural operations, but you want to try to maximize the distance there, create a kind of a buffer zone to prevent pathogens and other pests that might be loving life in these other systems and these other less regulated and less controlled systems. You want to prevent them from being able to gain access to this hydroponic system. And also, really important, is water availability. So this farmer has access to water from a well that's nearby, and that's important. Although this minimizes water use, it's a non-starter without water input. So having some access to a good source of water, a somewhat reliable source of water, is really important. So the major threats that are threats to most systems, but here especially we have insect pests as well as disease, and I'll go through a little more about each of those going forward. So these caterpillars are super prevalent there, and there's a lot of other types of beetles and things that like to chew on pepper plants, and pesticide application would be a nice preventative measure, but economically that is a challenge. So what often happens is just a manual inspection, and that's what I probably have to recommend, unless you could use pesticides. But as this is a really small area and it's not unreasonable to go and look at it every day, generally looking for these with somewhat of a trained eye can likely be sufficient because they don't really reproduce super rapidly like some other pests. So just finding these and getting rid of them, and trying to keep the area closed in so that they can't really gain access, which is a bit of a losing battle, but do your best. And then these aphids really can be the scourge of this type of system. They reproduce super quickly through parthenogenesis, and they can be super destructive. You can get a couple aphids on a plant, and then the next day it can be in really rough shape. So timing is really one of the best defenses against this, knowing when the aphids are most active. In this case, this particular aphid seems to be more active in the months of January and February. And so really it kind of goes into crop rotation and not planting these peppers at that point. Instead, picking a different crop that the aphids don't like as much. For example, this native spinach crop that I'll talk a little bit about later. Also trying to deter the aphids from entering by using things like oils, such as essential oils, and if you can get some pesticides, then that might be the most effective use, but that's really not an available option in this case. So really just trying to limit their access, and based on the timing, looking at when they are most active. Of course, seeing as there's no winter, it's always something you're going to have to be looking out for and just kind of monitoring. But it seems a lot of times if you can time it right, you can try to avoid the worst of this. Here's root rot is a big problem that you see a lot in hydroponic systems, especially in warmer areas. These are the causal agents here: Pythium, Phytophthora, Fusarium. And the way to try to combat this is by cycling more frequently, using like hydrogen peroxide to try to kill pathogens, as well as to really more so to try to increase the oxygen levels in the nutrient solution to try to increase the exchange for the roots and increase root health, improve root health. Also trying to keep temperatures down so they're not in these pathogens' optimal range as much as possible, keeping it as low as possible. It can be hard when temperatures get into the 90s, but just trying to minimize as much as possible helps. And increasing oxygen levels in solution in general is through those combination of things: circulating the water more, whether manually or if you're able to have the electricity to run pumps, things like that. And then stem rot is another issue that's been pretty prevalent in these kind of systems, and it's largely caused by, there's some overlap here. So some Fusarium Pythium species can cause this, as well as Rhizoctonia. You can see here the stem's really just been eaten and it's girdled the plant and choked it out from the bottom. And this can be super destructive. All of a sudden you just see plants start dropping. And a lot of similar things are used to try to control this, not covering things and letting airflow coming in, trying to keep temperatures down. Something I didn't mention before is to keep the water temperature down. A lot of times it's a good thing I recommend burying the tanks, so that you keep that temperature. The actual soil environment helps to regulate the temperature of that water a little bit, and that can help keep temperatures down low enough where you don't see the same level of incidence even with the same inoculum. And also just trying to time things as well. So when the spores are most active, not having this plant when the spores are being dispersed at the highest rate, not having this be present. Also sourcing seedlings, super important as well, because you want to make sure that they are free of infection. Nutrition is going to be super important, preventing getting as healthy plants as possible, and you have to look into the nutrient solution, things like that, to make sure that happens, as well as monitoring the pH so nutrients can be taken up, and preventing algal blooms, so really covering up, preventing light from getting into the water, so that you don't see algae stealing nutrients that you want your plants to be having. And so again, seedling sourcing, you see those nice healthy roots there. It seems like it's more recommendable. Well, I don't know if that's a word, but it's recommended to try to grow hydroponic seedlings, or really making sure you're sourcing them from a reliable source and doing something really good sterile techniques when you're growing them, because a lot of those pathogens I mentioned are very prevalent in soil ecosystems. Um, Sanitation, washing hands, and just making sure things are as clean as possible is vital.